ॐ न सदासीन्नो सदासीत्तदानीम् नासीद्रजो नो व्योमा परो यत् किमावरीवः कुहकस्य शरमन्न अम्भः किमासीद् गहनम् गभीरम् न मृत्युरमृतन्दरहिना रात्र्या अन्न आसीत् प्रकेतः आनीदवादग्गस्वदया तदेकम् तस्माद्धान्यन्न परः किञ्चनासा तम आसीत् तमसा गूढमग्रे प्रकेतम् सलिलग सर्वमा इदम् तुच्छेनाभ्युपहितं यदासीत्.
Welcome to the viewers. Today for the interview we have distinguished scholar Professor Pradeep Gokhle with us. Welcome sir for the interview. Also in the interview we have Professor Mangesh Kulkarni who will be joining with us to interview Professor Pradeep Gokhle. Professor Mangesh Kulkarni belongs to the Department of Politics and Public Administration. On behalf of Department of Philosophy, Saitrupai Phule Pune University, I would like to welcome Mangesh sir also for the interview. And briefly, Professor Mangesh Kulkarni will introduce Gokhle sir.
Thanks. I am really very glad to have this opportunity to give a brief overview of Professor Gokhle's career. It's not easy to do so, and that's because he is an extremely versatile person. And so therefore, right now I am going to be brief. We'll get to know more about his work and the many areas to which he has contributed later on in the course of the interview. But just some basic facts. In my eyes, what makes him unique is that apart from being a philosopher of a very high order, he also has many other accomplishments. For example, his training has not been exclusively in philosophy, though of course his master's degree and his doctorate, they are of course both in philosophy. But earlier he also studied statistics. Then he also has degrees in Sanskrit. So this I think is quite a unique combination. And especially his training in statistics and his knowledge of Sanskrit, language, grammar, etc. surely explains why he is so ably able to handle certain kinds of themes and certain modes of doing analytical philosophy, for example. And his knowledge of Sanskrit has of course greatly helped him in the context of his very substantial work in the area of classical Indian thought. Now, talking of classical Indian thought, his PhD thesis itself, the theme of that thesis gives us an indication of the twofold nature of his work in a sense, because it deals with the discussion of fallacies in classical Indian logic. So therefore you can see that on the one hand it deals with Indian thought, classical Indian thought, and then of course it also deals with logic, which is a very very rigorous branch of the larger discipline of philosophy. And this thesis earned him a very prestigious prize that is given in the name of Gurudev Ranade, who, as some of you would know, was a major philosopher, academic philosopher, but also a sort of spiritual figure of modern Maharashtra and India more generally. Now, having said that, let's now follow the trajectory, the academic trajectory of Professor Gokhle. He remained here in the Department of Philosophy, where he completed his doctorate, that is the Department of Philosophy, University of Pune, for a very long time, till about 2012, or about 30 years he remained there. And from where he then retired as professor. But then this was a kind of voluntary retirement, and after 2012 he joined the Institute of Higher Tibetan Studies.
Central Institute of
Higher
Tibetan Studies.
Right, of Higher Tibetan Studies, which is located in Sarnath, where he was research professor until recently, and where he also conducted a great deal of research, organized many seminars, national and international seminars, etc. But before that, at the University of Pune itself, he guided number of research students, and I think at least 11 students have completed PhD under his guidance, and another 4 students have completed their MPhil. Uh, and one other very important contribution that he made to that department, and I would say to the larger the discipline of philosophy itself, is that he for a long time edited the department's Marathi Journal of Philosophy, which is called Paramarsha. And through this, he really made available a forum to those who wish to write on philosophy in Marathi. And so that, I think, is a very important contribution of his as well. Now, ultimately, the work of a scholar becomes known to the larger world through that scholar's publications. And here it is simply not possible to list all his publications. The number is truly large and impressive. So I will just mention some of the major books, and then I think he will probably make references to some of his other writings in the course of the interview. Right. So as far as his publications in English are concerned, these are one, Inference and Fallacies discussed in ancient Indian logic with special reference to Nyaya and Buddhism. Then Vada Nyaya of Dharmakirti. Third, Hetu Bindu of Dharmakirti. Then the next publication is a study in the Jain theory of Paroksha Pramana. And now these 4 were published by a Delhi-based publishing house called Sadguru. And then the last one on Lokayata, Charvaka, a philosophical inquiry, this was published about 3 years ago by none other than the Oxford University Press, and it has been very, very well received. These are his writings in, I mean, the book length works, largely independent works in English. And in Marathi, again, he has a number of book length publications which deal with a variety of themes such as Charvaka thought, then ranging from critique of Manusmriti, then reflection on Charvaka, then on Jnanadev's philosophy in the Anubhavamrita, and then also a book or a tract on the work of a contemporary scholar and ideologue, Comrade Sharad Patil. So this now gives us truly the range of his writings, and this is of course in addition to numerous writings in Marathi journals, also in journals in English, including very, very major international journals such as Philosophy East and West. But he has not remained content with this kind of academic work, but has also tried to always reach out to a larger audience, and this partly comes from his earlier involvement in certain kinds of radical social reform kind of concerns, such as intercaste marriage, etc. Generally, he has been a radical critique of the caste system. We will get to hear more about it later. And so he has always tried to reach out to a larger readership and larger audience. So he gave a series of lectures. These were All India Radio lectures, and they have also been published in the form of a book in Marathi. He has also written in the popular press, in journals brought out by activists in Marathi, etc. So this is really a very large body of work. Apart from this, he has published poetry, which is again, that's what as I said, he is versatile, and that's one of the dimensions of his versatile personality. So I think with this I will stop. About he is still of course extremely active intellectually, and he is working on certain projects, but we will get to know about them later in the conversation. So I will now stop at this juncture.
Thank you, Mangesh sir. Sir, with this we'd like to begin and ask you a few questions.
Okay.
Sir, can you tell us about your personal and academic background and what made you enter into the field of philosophy?
Probably I will have to go to my childhood, my school days, when it was a kind of complex shaping of my personality, you can say. On the one hand, there was a very orthodox atmosphere in our family. My mother was very orthodox Hindu, and that kind of upbringing where I was asked to perform certain rituals and all that, about which I was developing a kind of skepticism. So I used to, in a way, you can say, fight with my parents, and uh, I used to think in this way. I mean, my mother has asked me to do such and such things, but what if I do not do it, or why should I do it? And even my family members were going to a kind of spiritual guru, and I also used to go there. But then through that, I was developing a kind of, you can say, twofold temperament. One is, on the one hand, I was becoming heretic, and on the other hand, I was also very curious about spirituality. I mean, not that I was just rejecting everything as a kind of rationalist, but also I was thinking there may be, if at all there is something, what is it? So in this way, this was one kind of upbringing. On the other hand, in the school, I got a very good Sanskrit teacher. His name was Avdut Hardikar, and he taught us Sanskrit not only just how to read Sanskrit and how to translate it, but also how to compose in Sanskrit, how to compose poems in Sanskrit, and he developed a kind of interest, a kind of love for Sanskrit, and that love gradually grew when I went to Tilak Maharashtra Vidyapit, which was very near to my school and my house also. So there I appeared for some examinations in Shastras, that is Sanskrit language systems, and particularly in Kavya Shastra. And side by side, I also was introduced to some philosophy in a way. That is, I had a very good Sanskrit Pandit there as a teacher, namely Pandit Vaman Shastri Bhagavat, and he was a grammarian, but he also used to teach other Sanskrit darshanas. So I was acquainted with Sarva Darshan Sangraha, Tarka Sangraha, and through that I developed some kind of interest in philosophy. Now in Sarva Darshana Sangraha, particular darshanas were prescribed, and among them was Charvaka. So out of the darshanas which were taught under Sarva Darshana Sangraha, Charvaka attracted me most. That is because it was matching with my disbelieving kind of temperament. And so with this background, so I had a fascination of Sanskrit, but at the same time, what other Sanskritists were believing in, I was not believing in that. So, so this is one part of upbringing which was later on reflected in my studies in philosophy. But on the other hand, I was also taught by my teachers that just studying Sanskrit will not give you a good career in life. So you should study sciences or some other subjects like mathematics, statistics, and so on and so forth, and you should go for competitive examinations like IAS and all that. So I was tempted to do that also. And with this kind of idea, vague idea about my future career, I did bachelor's in statistics, mathematics, Sanskrit. But then after that, I realized that actually this statistics, mathematics does not suit to my temperament. What should I do? So I cannot continue as a statistician, or even this IAS, IPS, and so on and so forth. This is not really my cup of tea. So what should I do? So I just spent 2 years after my bachelor's degree, just like that. Just exploring certain possibilities. And in that period, somehow, I may not, because there is no time to tell all these personal things. But I got acquainted with Professor Barlinge, Surendra Barlinge, when I was thinking of doing MA in Sanskrit, and I was staying in university boys hostel, and Barlinge was happened to be the rector at that time. So, I had some talks with him, and then I thought that perhaps philosophy may be suitable for me. At that time, in those days, in the Department of Philosophy, every Saturday there were seminars used to take place. Some student, some teacher, some research scholar used to present something for 10 minutes, 15 minutes, and it was followed by discussion. So, I was not doing philosophy at that time, but I just attended some of the some of those seminars, Saturday seminars, and I found that in Sanskrit department, suppose I have my doubts about some of the received beliefs and received theories, then the people will not listen to me. They will say, okay, this is what you think, but all these things have already been answered in our darshanas, so we need not bother about it much. But in philosophy department, at least all such doubts could be heard and they could be discussed. So, I thought that perhaps philosophy is the best possible place where I can join as a student, as a postgraduate student, and I asked Professor Barlinge, he gladly agreed, and then I joined philosophy for my master's degree. I had no background in philosophy, particularly Western philosophy, at undergraduate level at all at that time. So, my undergraduate, the study in Western philosophy actually began when I joined post graduation. But at that time in the university, some particularly because of Barlinge's initiatives, it was not Western philosophy was not taught in a traditional way. The contemporary trends in Western philosophy, particularly like philosophical analysis and phenomenology, existentialism, such topics were introduced and they were discussed, and that was a great exposure to me.
Right. Well, you already explained some of the formative influences on your thinking. But to once again begin where you left off, can you also tell us something more about the kind of intellectual milieu in which you found yourself there? For example, apart from Professor Barlinge, whose own, I think, whose own training or whose own real intellectual strength was in analytical philosophy, Indian logic, etc. By the time you were a student, I think Professor Sundararajan had also joined.
Yes, of course,
Who again was a very versatile person.
Yes, yes, yes.
And already at that time, he had a serious interest in continental thought. I think he was also something of a charismatic teacher.
Yes.
So that is one person I would like
Yes,
to talk
particularly he used to teach courses in philosophy of science, particularly the courses from which I benefited, and Wittgenstein, that is his course on Tractatus Logico Philosophicus particularly, that influenced me most. And then, so when I studied analytical philosophy, Wittgenstein and philosophy of sciences, then I started comparing some of these things with my understanding of Indian philosophy. So, for example, this book on Jnaneshwara, I had offered Jnaneshwara as one of the courses. It was, author based courses were there at postgraduate level. So, one of the courses was on Jnaneshwara. Actually, at that time Professor Barlinge was not happy with my decision of taking Jnaneshwara as a course, but while studying Anubhavamrita of Jnaneshwara, I found many things which can be compared with analytical philosophy, with Wittgenstein, because Jnaneshwara's way of thinking in Jnaneshwari, that is Bhavartha Deepika, and his way of thinking in Anubhavamrita, there is a vast difference. In Anubhavamrita, he writes as a free thinker, as a philosopher, as an analyst. So, he takes up the concepts of say Adhyana, Dhyana, and I mean, according to my interpretation, he is trying to find the, I mean, particularly his Adhyana Khandana, his analysis of ignorance, and ultimately he comes to the conclusion that you cannot find Adhyana anywhere at all. So, now this all that analysis I thought was a kind of bringing out conceptual geography of the concept of Adhyana. Where can we locate Adhyana? By interpreting it in various ways. So, in this way I mean Professor Barlinge, Professor Marathe, I mean he also has influenced me a lot, because he was teaching the courses in Indian logic and Nyaya, and he was thoroughly dissatisfied with Nyaya, and he was influenced by Buddhism a lot, I mean Buddhist logic, Buddhism, and many students were being trained under him and I was also influenced by him, although since I myself had an exposure to Sanskrit, I used to directly go to the Sanskrit text, and sometimes I found that I was not very happy with Professor Marathe's interpretation. So, I read some of his articles, but I did not agree with that. So, all these things went on, but at the same time his general approach that I mean Nyaya philosophy somehow say accepts all these categories, Dravya, Guna, Karma, etc., and thinks in a realistic way, and that realistic way is challenged by Buddhists, and that Buddhist challenge should be taken seriously. This general approach I very much appreciated, and I followed that in my doctoral thesis also. And of course, there was another reason for taking up this topic for doctoral thesis, that Professor Barlinge already had a work on Indian logic, modern introduction to Indian logic, and there he had compared many theories in Indian in Nyaya and other forms of Indian logic with Western logic. That is how you can formalize Indian concept of inference and so on and so forth. So, that again gave a kind of boost to me to work on those lines, how we can symbolize Indian logic and talk about fallacies in Indian theories of inference and so on and so forth.
So that's very nice to hear. About your PhD thesis and its subsequent publication in the form of book in 1992. So we would like you to throw some light on it and your approach towards Buddhist and Nyaya philosophy explicitly.
So, actually after that, when that my doctoral thesis was just lying, but my friend Harishankar Prasad from Delhi, he advised me to send that thesis to a publisher, and somehow it was accepted for publication. Now, after that the publisher told me that why don't you translate some Buddhist texts, because I already had some background in Sanskrit. So, I started I mean I took up Vadanyaya of Dharmakirti and then Hetubindu of Dharmakirti, and I translated it into English, and at the same time I mean it was a annotated translation with introduction. So, there I also tried to interpret what exactly say this Buddhist logician Dharmakirti is talking about. So, I found, I mean I particularly regard Dharmakirti as the most influential Indian logician, and unfortunately it has not been given that importance because of the overestimation of Nyaya and Navyanyaya. So, Nyaya and Navyanyaya particularly has dominated the scene of Indian logic, and therefore, people always think that if at all we have to find Indian logic in its best form, then you have to find it in say Navyanyaya. But then there are some problems which Navyanayayikas have to face, will have to face, if we start comparing Nyaya logic with Western logic. and particularly the problem is that of psychologism. That is in Nyaya syllogism, so called Nyaya syllogism, the first there is this pratidnya, declaration, and then reason, and then this vyapti statement, statement of pervasion, and then application, and then conclusion. So, all these steps do not follow in a formal logical way at all. I mean the next step does not follow from the earlier step in a logical way, or even the conclusion. I mean one can always ask, is this step necessary, logically necessary? Are all these 5 steps logically necessary? And then answer which will be given will be in more in psychological terms rather than logical terms. Whereas, we find that Dharmakirti insisted that in an inference conclusion should necessarily follow from the premises, and only what is formally necessary that should be kept. If something and if something is not formally necessary, then it should not be made mandatory. For example, suppose there are 2 premises. Now, in which order the premises should be presented? Is there any rule? Now, from formal point of view, you cannot make any rule that first, I mean for example, in modus ponens, suppose you say first you should state P implies Q and then P, only then you can say that Q is the conclusion. Suppose you change the order, first P implies Q, then you cannot conclude Q. Suppose somebody says like this, then immediately formal logician will say no, there is no such rule at all. That after all, what are all these premises? They are related by the relation of conjunction, and conjunction is commutative. So, you can change the order and there is no problem from formal point of view. And this was Dharmakirti's view. He said that you may state either Vyapti first and then Paksha Dharmata, or Paksha Dharmata first then Vyapti, that does not make any difference. And he went to the extent to say that since conclusion necessarily follows from the premises, you need not even state the conclusion when you state the premises. So, I think, I mean I have written in one of my papers, that is 3 necessities in the theory, Dharmakirti's theory of inference, that I mean the professors like Jain Mohanty, Matilal, they always put this Nyaya in the center of Indian philosophy, in Indian logic, and then they started comparing it with Western logic, and then they tried to defend Indian Nyaya logic against the charges such as psychologism. Instead of that, I am saying that if you put Dharmakirti at the center of Indian logic and then start comparing it with Western logic, then we will be certainly in a better position. We will not have to answer unnecessary charges.
Right. That reminds me that you always used to say this, that there was a whole project actually, the Pandit philosopher dialogue, etc., which was structured around these lines. And I remember you were saying that this is comparing apples and oranges, that actually Dharmakirti should have been in the forefront. But then that again reminds me of your general preference for the heterodox systems in Indian tradition as compared to the general preference for orthodox systems.
Preference for heterodox as against orthodox.
Your preference.
Yes.
As against the general preference.
General preference, yes.
For orthodox systems.
Yes.
So, can you please shed some light on this?
So, this is an important issue, because traditionally we are told that Indian philosophy, the systems of Indian philosophy can be classified into 2 groups, Astika and Nastika. And by Astika, what we mean is that which accepts Vedas as Pramana. By Nastika, we mean that which does not accept Vedas as Pramana. Now, modern philosophers have who are again thinking mainly in terms of Western philosophy, they would say that I mean what is the importance of accepting a particular text or not accepting a particular text, how is it philosophically relevant? And therefore, this division of Indian philosophical systems into Astika and Nastika has no philosophical relevance. And this is what, for example, Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay also said, Daya Krishna also said. And Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay would say that actually what is philosophically relevant, idealism versus materialism, that controversy is more important from philosophical point of view. And Astika Nastika has no significance. For me, Astika and Nastika also has philosophical significance, but that philosophical significance is via social significance. That is, accepting Vedas as Pramana certainly has certain social implications. And that, so, what kind of idea of a good life, a good social life you have? If you are Astika, then you are accepting Vedas as Pramana, and not just accepting Vedas as Pramana, but there is a series of texts, Vedas, Smritis, Puranas and all that, where you are taught about the Chaturvarnya, and so Varna system is acceptable, the ritualism is acceptable, ritualism of sacrifices. So, if you perform a sacrifice, then you go to Swarga and all that. So, this ritualism and caste system, this becomes an integral part of accepting Astika, accepting any Astika system. So, one who accepts any Astika system, and with the idea that it is Astika system, there can be debate about that. For example, about Sankhya, some people say that actually it was not really Astika, although it is claimed to be Astika, it is not Astika. So, such debates are possible, but there are certainly some systems which will claim themselves to be Astika. For example, Purva Mimamsa, Nyaya and even Vedanta. These systems are Astika systems, and they will themselves be proud to call themselves Astika. Now, this being Astika implies all these things which were certainly not acceptable to me from my college days, school days and all that, because I thought that, I mean, although I am born as a Brahmin, I should not die as a Brahmin. So, at some stage I decided to decaste myself, and I decasted myself according to my own way. I mean, when I married outside the caste deliberately, not just it was not just a love marriage, but so I mean that apart. The point is that in a way, suppose you go to Nyaya, then Nyaya is not only just accepting Vedas, but in their metaphysics, in their philosophical arguments, they also try to defend Varna system. For example, they would say that just as Ghatatva, Patatva, all these are jatis, and jati is something which is imperishable. So, it cannot be divided into parts, and jatis, there cannot be jati sankara. Sankara is something which is jati badhaka. So, same thing applies to Brahmanatva, Kshatriyatva, they are also jatis. So, in this way, I mean, even being Astika was is very much philosophically relevant, whereas the Nastika systems, namely Buddhism, Jainism and Charvaka, although there are again diversities between these systems and within those systems also. Within Buddhism there is a diversity, within Jainism there is diversity, within Charvaka also there is diversity, as I have tried to point out in my book. But one point is common, that they are all Nastika, means they do not accept Varna Jati system, they do not accept ritualism or Brahmanical ritualism. So, this is something which was I mean because of which while studying these systems I felt myself at home safe, so to say, that I will not have to defend these things unnecessarily if I am defending either say Jainism or Buddhism or Charvaka.
So, just in continuity to that earlier question, in some ways I think Charvaka is the most radical of those heterodox schools. Also, it is the one school which is very strange, because we know about it mostly as Purva Paksha, except for probably Jayarashi Bhatta's text. There is hardly anything available.
Yes.
So, and whereas as far as your work is concerned, you have both in Marathi and in English, you have written consistently on Charvaka, and you are in fact this Oxford University Press publication also deals with that system of thought. So maybe you could say something more about it.
So, you are right. Uh, Traditionally, Charvaka Darshana has been regarded as a Purvapaksha of all other systems, and in Sarvadarshana Sangraha, for example, of Madhavacharya, we find this kind of hierarchy. It starts with Charvaka Darshana as the first Darshana and it ends with Vedanta Darshana. So, that was a general trend to regard Charvaka as something which can be easily refuted and which needs to be refuted. Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay was perhaps in the modern times the first philosopher who tried to make this hierarchy topsy-turvy. He wrote an introductory book on Indian philosophy. There he started with Vedanta or I mean some such Astika Darshana and ended up with Charvaka. So, for him Charvaka Darshana was something which should be regarded as the highest philosophical view. But of course, he had a particular approach to Charvaka or particular interpretation of Charvaka in his mind, and that was materialistic interpretation. On the other hand, I had when I was studying Charvaka, I had read this Sadashiv Athawale's Marathi book, Charvak Itihas and Tatvajnan, which is a very good book. I think it should have been translated in English. There he takes a kind of say pluralistic approach to Charvaka Darshana, and he just I mean it is a kind of descriptive approach, and he does not systematize it very much, but he talks about skeptic Charvaka like Jayarashi Bhatta and Loka Prasiddha Anumanavadi Charvaka like Purandara. That is, among Charvakas, we should not say that if one is Charvaka, then he should refute inference as Pramana, because that is the popular image. Popular image of Charvaka is that Charvaka accepts only Pratyaksha Pramana and denies inference altogether. Whereas, in history there were philosophers who claimed themselves to be Charvaka, claimed themselves to be Lokayatika, but some of them denied all Pramanas, like Jayarashi Bhatta. He claimed a kind of legacy of Bruhaspati, but he said that even Bruhaspati did not accept any Pramana at all. Then we have in Jayanta Bhatta's Nyayamanjari, there is a reference to different schools of Charvaka, Sushikshita Charvaka, Dhurta Charvaka, and according to him Sushikshita Tara Charvaka, that is more learned Charvakas, accepted a certain kind of inference also as Pramana. And what kind of inference? They say Utpanna Pratiti Anumana, that is roughly the inference which can be verified. Which can be verified by perception. And there was Purandara, again an important Charvaka philosopher whose writings are not available, but some of these statements are available, and he says that Charvakas accept a certain kind of inference also. What kind of inference? He says Loka Prasiddha Anumana. So, this Utpanna Pratiti Anumana, Loka Prasiddha Anumana, I thought that they are not the same. Whereas, Devi Prasad Chattopadhyay and others, they say that after all he accepts some kind of Anumana, and whether it is Loka Prasiddha or it is Utpanna Pratiti, this simply means that they are accepting certain kind of Anumana, and therefore, and this they regarded as the essence of all Charvaka philosophers. According to these people, actually Charvakas did accept inferences, but the statement that they did not accept inferences is something like a false charge against them leveled by their opponents. This is the picture they give, whereas according to me there must have been some Charvakas who challenged inference as Pramana, and their challenge to inference as Pramana was very important, and that was something like Humean skepticism about inductive inference, and that is rejection of inference as Pramana, and at the same time acceptance of certain types of inference. These two positions can be reconciled, and you can also say that there might have been some Charvakas which insisted on this position, some Charvakas which insisted on that position, and therefore Charvaka can be regarded, instead of regarding it as a single school, it can be regarded as a family of schools. And then the question is what is common between them, because if you use the word family, then it reminds us of Wittgenstein's family resemblance, where you do not find anything in common ultimately. But here I feel that a kind of emphasis on reasoning, this a kind of this worldly approach, rejection of other worlds, rejection of something which transcendent entities, this can be regarded as something common to all these different schools of Charvakas. And this is what I tried to argue in my Marathi book, which was recently published, there is Tattvachintak Charvaka, and also in English book Charvaka, a philosophical inquiry, which was published by Oxford University Press.
Sir, taking cue from these heterodox traditions, we have spoken about Buddhism, that is early Buddhist thought, and Dinnag and Dharmakirti. With that, we went to Charvaka. Now, you also had a significant contribution to Jain philosophy, and especially to Jain logic and epistemology. So, you have your own views on Syadvada, in which papers you have published your views. So, can you just throw light on the Jaina logic and epistemology?
Yes. I mean, Jainism also has attracted me in a way, because they have a different way of thinking, particularly when they talk of the way of life, that is the ethical way of life. In their view, ahimsa is the highest value, and then this ahimsa is to be pursued not only in our practical behavior, but also in our thinking, in our arguing, in our talking, and so on and so forth, at the level of speech, at the level of thinking, and at every level. And then that had reflections to their approach to logic also. That is, they developed a different theory called what is called Syadvad, which is regarded as a part of their greater theory, that which is called Anekantavad. Now, in Syadvad, they apparently they accepted the view that you can assert a statement and also negate a statement, and assert both the statement and its negation, and also the negation of the statement and negation of the negation, and so on and so forth. So, this was a problem in a way before modern students of Jainism. In ancient days also it was a problem, and Jainism was criticized for their Syadvada approach, and with easily within 2-3 statements they were just discarded, that they are inconsistent, that is all. They are making statements that ghataha asti and ghataha nasti, syad ghataha asti, syad ghataha nasti. So, how to interpret it? Modern thinkers, modern scholars of Jainism tried to interpret it in a different way. For example, Professor Barlinge himself tried to interpret these statements in modal logical form, because he was acquainted to modern theories of logic, and he was acquainted with modal logic. So, in modal logic we have the statement like possibly P, and possibly not P. So, and necessarily P, necessarily not P, and so on and so forth. So, if you just say P and not P, then it is a contradiction. But if you say possibly P and possibly not P, it is not a contradiction. So, if you interpret the Syadvada doctrine of Jainas in a modal logical way, then perhaps the contradictions can be resolved, and this was Barlinger's approach. Similarly, there were other interpretations in terms of many valued logic, for example. So, I studied some of those interpretations. Similarly, after we also have Matilal's interpretation in terms of conditional statements. So, if every statement is regarded as a conditional statement, that is P, when I say P, it is conditionally P and conditionally not P. So, conditionally P and conditionally not P will not contradict with each other. So, after studying them, I thought that they are not satisfactory. One of the reasons was that when we talk of possibly P plus possibly not P, actually it leads to some kind of uncertainty, and Jainas were not ready to accept any kind of uncertainty. They did not say that Syad Ghataha Asti does not mean that, I mean, these are the statements of Lord Mahavira according to them. Lord Mahavira talked in terms of Syadvada. So, he was not uncertain whether pot exists or not. He was saying in a way pot exists, means from a certain standpoint pot exists, from a certain standpoint pot does not exist. And therefore, I thought that it will be better to interpret them as metalinguistic statements rather than object linguistic statements, such that there is a standpoint from which P, there is a standpoint from which not P, there is a standpoint from which indeterminate P, that is because they also talked about avaktavya. So, this with the help of this we can give a kind of consistent interpretation, that is what I have tried to argue in one of the papers.
Right. So, we have Jainism and also very in some ways very much like it you have Buddhism, which are also seen as not only systems of thought but as religions in a broad sense, though actually the term, we know that the term religion doesn't work there. But still, I mean, there are people who treat them as if they were religions, their communities, etc. But of these two, I have a feeling that eventually you were really fascinated by and you continue to be fascinated by Buddhism. Not only in terms of logic but ethics and also a certain kind of politics. And there of course then we have to talk about the modern interpretation of Buddhism, reinterpretation by Dr. Ambedkar. And so you have also done significant work on that aspect of, or that kind of reconstruction of Buddhism, on engaged Buddhism, etc. So much so that I remember you have at one point even you said publicly that I am a Buddhist, or why you have written about this. Why am I a Buddhist? You said, obviously you modeled your earlier statement on Dr. Ambedkar's statement that I was born a Hindu, I will not die a Hindu. You said I was born a Brahmin and so on. So this was, I think, your positive way of getting out of that particular type of stifling Brahmanism that you opposed.
Yes.
And seeking something constructive, which you somehow, I think, did not find really in Charvaka. Charvaka was the moment of negation, critique, etc. And then in Buddhism, this is a kind of a sublation, as it were, the moment of sublation. So, can you say something about this?
Yeah, I mean, certainly Charvaka could not satisfy my aspirations for good life fully, because with respect to values, you can say yes. I mean, Charvaka denies certain value system, but it does not provide a kind of a definite or full-fledged value system. It is a kind of open texture approach to values. I mean, I don't accept the charge that Charvakas were hedonist, of a kind of sensuous hedonist and all that. There is a possibility of I mean spiritual upliftment even within Charvaka, if you are not say deriving implications to other words and so on and so forth. But Charvaka did not fulfill all those aspirations, and therefore Buddhism attracted me a lot. So, my attraction to Buddhism insofar as this my life is concerned was from two corners. One is Vipassana meditation and the other is Baba Saheb Ambedkar's interpretation of Buddhism. Because even when I was attracted to Buddhism, I was a Charvaka. So, within Buddhism, if you follow Buddhism as a kind of religion, then within Buddhism there is a lot of discussion about other worlds and rebirth and all that. So, generally if you go to any religious Buddhist, I mean traditional religious Buddhist, and tell him that I do not want to accept rebirth, then he would say that in that case you will not be a Buddhist, you cannot be a Buddhist. So, I was in search of a Buddhism which one can live and live happily, successfully. I mean, one can say aspire, one can pursue higher goals of life through Buddhism without believing in rebirth. And there I found that in Vipassana meditation also, although Goenka, Satyanarayan Goenka, the Vipassana master, he himself was a believer, but as a practice of Vipassana meditation, he never insisted that you should believe in this, you should believe in that. On the other hand, the practice of Vipassana meditation itself involved bracketing all such beliefs and just focusing on what is happening inside your body, what is happening with your breathing and all that. So, that was a very good exposure to Buddhism, and the other exposure to Buddhism was of course through Baba Saheb Ambedkar's writings. My Ambedkar studies took me to a wider range, because I started asking that Ambedkar may not be an isolated figure of this kind who was facing the problem of modernity and so to say synthesizing modernity with Buddhism. And there were many others, I realized that there were others who engaged Buddhists like Buddhadasa Bhikkhu, who were also trying to interpret Buddhism without accepting rebirth and life after death and so on and so forth. So, similarly Stephen Batchelor, who calls himself a secular Buddhist and who has written a lot on secular Buddhism. So, secular Buddhism should be regarded as a phenomenon and where of course, apparently it may appear as a contradiction, because if you regard Buddhism as a religion, then how can religion be secular, but this is what is needed today. That is, we have to have a religion in the very wide sense of the term, religiosity of life, religion in a wide sense, but at the same time it should be least dogmatic or free from dogmas. So, that possibility is available through Ambedkar and a modern form of Buddhism, according to me.
So, taking your views into consideration, you have always in your life been secular in your approaches. Now, when you look at philosophy and this Indian moral thought, you must have thought and you have done it while reinterpreting this Indian moral thought itself. So, can you just speak more on it?
It is actually related to this Astika and Nastika division. In Astika schools, generally we find emphasis on Varnashrama Dharma, Varna Dharma and so on and so forth. Whereas, along with Varna Dharma, sometimes they also accept what is called Sadharana Dharmas. So, Sadharana Dharma means there are obligations which need to be followed by all, irrespective of caste, gender, and so on and so forth. And there are certain obligations which are gender specific, caste specific, and so on and so forth. So, in Astika systems, and this is what I have argued, that in Astika systems, in Dharma Shastra, Brahmanical Dharma Shastra, and so on and so forth, although both Varnashrama Dharma and Sadharana Dharma are accepted, Sadharana Dharmas are to be followed within the framework of Varna Dharmas, Jati Dharmas, and so on and so forth. Whereas, in Nastika systems, particularly in Buddhism and Jainism, when there is an emphasis on Sadharana Dharmas, if at all Varna Dharma is to be accepted, it is to be accepted within the framework of Sadharana Dharma. That is, Sadharana Dharma get prominence. And now, so this is one important problem, that when we are talking of morality in Indian context, it is really the question of following Sadharana Dharmas and Vishesha Dharmas. We have to ask the question, what should be the relation between Sadharana Dharmas and Vishesha Dharmas. And then if you have to give prominence to Sadharana Dharmas and reinterpret Vishesha Dharmas in terms of Sadharana Dharmas, that is institutional morality and common morality. So, this is one important issue. The second important issue is, if we accept common morality, under common morality we are accepting certain Sadharana Dharmas. But then among those Sadharana Dharmas, what is the relation? That is Ahimsa, Satya, Asteya, Brahmacharya, Aparigraha, or instead of Brahmacharya, suppose we say Indriya Nigraha, Shaucha, and so on and so forth. There are many a list of Sadharana Dharmas. How are they related with each other? Is there any say principal Sadharana Dharma from which others can be derived? And this was an important question with which I got engaged, and in the Dandrad Memorial lecture I focused on that, and I presented a view that by analyzing these Sadharana Dharmas, I came to the conclusion that Ahimsa and Satya, these two are the most fundamental, the ultimate moral principles, and other moral principles are subservient to it, subservient to these two, or they can be reduced to these two, they can be interpreted in terms of these two. For example, take Asteya. Asteya, after all, why is Asteya wrong? Why is Asteya a value? Why is Steya wrong? Why is stealing wrong? Then it can be interpreted in terms of Ahimsa and Satya. I will not go into all those details, but that is what I have tried to argue there. And now, but among Satya and Ahimsa, can we again reduce one to the other? There have been attempts of this kind also. For example, Jainas would say that Ahimsa is the highest principle and even Satya is subservient to Ahimsa. Somebody may take a position that Satya is the highest principle, Ahimsa is just a means to Satya. So, all such positions are possible, but in my analysis I have tried to show that they cannot be reduced to each other, and so within morality this kind of conflict is always possible. That is what I have tried to argue. So, there is a kind of duality within morality. There is no single ultimate moral principle from which you can derive all other principles.
Right. So, traditionally there used to be a very close nexus between morality and religion, so much so that they were often seen as coextensive. But in the modern period, there has been a sundering often of this kind of link, and many people have argued that what we need is a kind of purely secular, rational kind of morality. Here, for example, even in this city, Pune, we had people like A.B. Shah, who tirelessly argued for a morality anchored in rationalism, humanism, and a very strong version of secularism. Now, considering your interest in Chavaka, etc., one might get the feeling that perhaps you would be sympathetic to this sort of position. But it appears that you have increasingly been preoccupied with actually re-establishing this kind of nexus, as you have in fact already indicated, between religion and morality, or if not, one doesn't want to use the term religion, then dhamma. That a dhamma based morality is what we have been looking for, and therefore Marx famously once said that all critique begins with the critique of religion. And in your case, I feel that of course you have been engaged in a critique of religion, but you also now are currently engaged with the reconstruction of religion or religious thought. So can you say something more about this?
Yes, I mean reconstruction is a very important activity actually which needs to be performed, I think, and it should be performed in an open way. The problem is that many times reconstructions do take place, but one who reconstructs does not accept that he has reconstructed. He says that no, I have not done anything new. I mean the credit goes to the original thinker only. I mean this is of course in Indian culture we have this. Yeah. All the commentators they always say that I am honest to the original text. What I am saying is already there. I am not saying anything new, but we should be bold now at least. So far we were not so bold, but with reference to religion, I think that it should be dethroned in the sense that religion is not created by God. We have created God, we have created religion. Religion is our product, and therefore we own it, and we can also dismantle it, we can reconstruct it. So, without saying that no, ultimately it is Buddha Vachana, what I am saying is now such reconstructions have taken place in Buddhism. Nagarjuna said that, talked about Shunyavada, but he did not say that this is my Shunyavada. He said this is Buddha's Shunyavada. Everybody said that, everybody in Buddhism said. Now, unfortunately, this is about Ambedkar also. I mean, this is Ambedkar also said that this is Buddha's view. What I am stating is not Hinayana, not Mahayana, but it is Buddha's original thought. But of course, that was his interpretation of Buddha's thought. But the question is that why not take a step now that after all Buddha was a human being and he could err. It is quite possible that some of his so called insights are not acceptable to me, but that does not mean, I mean one is always free to be say 60% Buddhist or 80% Buddhist. It is not necessary that if one is Buddhist then he should be 100% Buddhist, or he should try to show at least that he is 100% Buddhist. I can be 50% Buddhist, 20% Christian and say 10% Hindu, why not? So, I am just I mean it is just I mean I am not saying that I want to be exactly like that, but the point is that all the religions are after all human made, and therefore, it is high time that we should re-understand them, reconstruct them, and make it a human phenomenon, purely human phenomenon, and not divine, God given kind of thing.
So, with so many such beautiful insights into this, all the traditions and your thoughts of unsecular approaches to religion also, now, we would just like to know what are you currently working on, or what are the current research projects which are into pipeline?
Now, there are many incomplete works. For example, I organized a seminar on Buddhism and caste when I was in Sarnath, and now I am working on that for the publication of anthology based on that. Now, this is one of the themes in my work, that how Buddhism has influenced Indian culture as a whole, and this anti-caste approach has influenced Buddhism has influenced Indian culture in various ways. Similarly, I have found that some of the so-called Astika systems, they are also greatly influenced by Buddhism, but that Buddhist influence is many times suppressed. For example, Buddhism has influenced Patanjala Yoga to a large extent. Now, there are scholars who are making such claims, but such claim need to be pursued more. Exactly in what way Buddhism has influenced Patanjali Yoga, for example. So, I am working on that theme. I have also written one paper on that, but now I am taking it as a project.
So, finally, let's come to this very large question, which is that of the significance of philosophy itself as a discipline and as a kind of activity, and perhaps also as a way of life in the changed circumstances in which we find ourselves in the early 21st century, an era which is dominated by globalization, by the dominance of different kinds of technology that have unsettled so many of our assumptions, such as biotechnology, for example, and an era which somehow does not seem to be very hospitable to the kind of calm contemplation that is demanded by philosophy, a form of contemplation that is calm but also critical, that is truly radical in the sense that something that goes to the roots, not radical in a narrow political sense. But these times somehow are not conducive to such pursuits. We are constantly, as Eliot would have put it, distracted by distraction from distraction. So, in such an era, and also when people have become pragmatic in a very, very narrow sense, that they want to look at the immediate cash value of everything, not in the philosophical pragmatic sense. And therefore, what is the place of philosophy in these times? One, and secondly, now more from an academic point of view, or even from a broader point of view, philosophy as an intellectual activity, philosophizing in a broad sense. What are the new types of intellectual resources and analytical skills that a young budding philosopher should acquire now at this point?
It is a really very big question, and I am not I do not find myself so to say eligible to answer it I mean fully at all. One thing I certainly believe is that ultimately philosophy is for life and life is not for philosophy. It is ultimately life is more important, and I mean this is an I do not know whether it is an advice to students of philosophy, that doing philosophy as a career ultimately philosophy itself is not ultimate according to me in that sense. Life is ultimate, philosophy is a way of making sense of life certainly, but if you are analytical minded, if you are critical minded, then certainly you have to look at philosophy in critically, analytically. So, think philosophically. Thinking philosophically is more important than studying philosophy. I mean many times we focus on studying philosophy, reading philosophy books, and this is how my upbringing also has been. I did not study philosophy in that sense, but I tried to think philosophically, and that is what I expect others also to do. That is a very simplistic answer that I would like to give.
Sir, as even sir has also asked you, what pertinent advice in the sense would you like to give those who are pursuing philosophy, or as a vision how to look towards philosophy, and where would philosophy go into future? What is your vision regarding, and what would be your suggestion to the young teachers or scholars to take the philosophy along the path of in future sense?
So, again a very big question. You see, there is something like rigorous philosophizing, and I sometimes find that in the name of globalization, in the name of say modern, transmodern thinking and so on and so forth, that rigorousness many times I do not find in philosophizing, just because we have to cover so many things and so many new things have entered into it and we have to cover all of them. So, we skip the center of the theme and just go astray, because there are so many different answers given by different people, and it is possible that some of those answers are irrelevant, but simply because they are there you have to take note of them. So, I think we should avoid that and focus on the issues, main issues, study them rigorously, even though it is possible that we may reach some of the conclusions which our ancestors have already reached and no new answers we have found. So, novelty is not an important thing, it should not be an important thing in philosophy, simply novelty for the sake of novelty. Truth is important, but it is possible that that truth may be Sanatana and in philosophy particularly people are very much interested in Sanatana Satya, or it may not be Sanatana, it may be what has been accepted as Sanatana so far is we may realize that it is not really Sanatana, that is also possible. But what is Sanatana and what is not Sanatana, that is the real issue with which we have to struggle, I think.
Now, sir would like to recite, as even Mangesh sir has also said, that he was even a poet at mind and he is very versatile and versatile personality. So, we would ask sir to recite a couple of lines from his poems compilation, and he has translated those lines from Marathi to English. So, he would like to just recite those lines here.
So, it is actually originally a Marathi poem. The title is Shunyaranyaka. So, you know Aranyaka, the Vedic texts were called Aranyaka and Upanishad. So, the poem, forest poem you can say, and forest poem on Shunya. It was written in around 1976 when I was doing MA. But now I realize that it is relevant to what I am studying in Nagarjuna and all that. So, I will just read it out. This is the English translation, English rendering of the original Marathi poem. It is always convenient to start with 0, because the person on 0 who becomes 1, 2, 3 can again become 0. But when one starts from 1, people say to him, "Oh, you are 1, now become 2, now you are 2, become 3. He also says, "I am 1 already. What is the harm in becoming 1 more, 1 more? And what will they say if I do not become so?" But when a person on 0 becomes 1, and people say to him, "You are 1, become 2 now," then the 0 person says humbly, "Though I am 1 now, originally I am 0. So, everyone should examine one's origin. For example, it has been said, in every statement there is a truth, and to every statement there is an objection which tries to establish the falsehood of that truth. So, when I stand on the firm basis of falsehood and hear the statements of the people, and I shake hands with the truths in those statements smilingly, then those truths get respected unexpectedly, and I remain unexpected respectfully. In Marathi it is, की सत्य ही अभावितपणे संभावित होतात आणि मी ही संभावितपणे अभावितच राहतो. Hence, 0, which I wanted to talk about, is getting accomplished at the end of this word game. Thank you.
It's a beautiful poem, I would say, and truly here today we have been exposed to this brilliant gem of the Department of Philosophy, and it was really precious for me, for Mangesh sir and the Department of Philosophy. So on behalf of all of us, we would like to thank Professor Pradeep Gokhle for coming here and giving us precious times for the interview. I would also like to thank Professor Mangesh Kulkarni on behalf of Department of Philosophy, so that he has taken out a time for the interview, and he has been here in the presence of Gokhle sir. And on the behalf of department, I like to thank even Professor Mangesh Kulkarni. Thank you.
I would also like to thank the department and both of you for the grand opportunity.
ॐ न सदासीन्नो सदासीत्तदानीम् नासीद्रजो नो व्योमा परो यत् किमावरीवः कुहगस्य शरमन्न अम्भः किमासीद् गहनं गभीरम्